Reagan is in theaters. It is an independent film starring Dennis Quaid as President Ronald Reagan. It's in theaters now. It's about a 2.5 hour biopic of his career. And oddly, it's told through the point of view of a Russian spy played by
John Voight.
John Voight plays a Russian spy that has had Ronald Reagan in his sights for years and seen him as a threat even before he became president. And we see kind of the highlights of Reagan's career up to winning the presidency and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And if you see the movie, it's all the classic. If you've seen news footage of Reagan, you would remember, like tear down that wall. He says it in the movie. Dennis, this whole thing really, I don't know that I agree with the way it was structured. I don't know if the point of view of Voight really added anything. It was a way to contextualize and tell his career, but I think you just could have cut that all out. Just show us him being Reagan. And Dennis Quaid is amazing in this film. And by the way, Dennis Quaid is a Republican.
No, he's an independent.
Well, you can tell he likes Reagan.
Yes, he likes Reagan, but he's an independent.
But he is amazing. I mean, when he turns into the older version of Ronald Reagan, and he's getting like the voice right and kind of the way the head moves and really, really amazing performance. I saw this film. I got one seat. I'm like, I'll see a 3 p.m. show in the afternoon. It was packed.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. It's not playing in a lot of theaters. It was packed. And I was like, why is this movie packed? It was crazy. And by the way, an unruly older audience all went to see it. And they loved it, clapped at the end. And in any like normal time, Dennis Quaid would be nominated for an Oscar if we lived in normal times. It's a great performance of a beloved president. There were, as they say, Reagan Democrats who loved Reagan. And while I think the film is flawed by the running time, the structure with John Voight, I really think you could have cut his whole character out, honestly. But I walked away just not only enjoying the movie, it made me sad for a time when we had a leader that comforted the country through rough times, that spoke to issues for all Americans instead of things being so divided. So in the end, when I was watching the film, I felt so sad, like, wow, we could use a president like Reagan right now. But I highly recommend the film. I give it a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. The performance of Dennis Quaid is the reason to see it. He plays young Reagan all the way through older Reagan. They do flashbacks. Up
until the end. Literally up until the end. Yeah.
And they deal head on with controversies about Reagan. They show him as a child being bullied and his mother saying, you got to stand up to bullies, which was something reminds me my mother said when I was a kid. When I was a kid, every kid gets bullied. I was bullied. My mom, I remember saying very clearly, my mom said, you got to fight your own battles. When I would come and say, hey, these kids are bugging me, learn to fight your own battles. That taught me a lot. And to see that same advice from Reagan's mother to a young little boy Reagan was really got to me. So I recommend the film. Alan, what did you think of Reagan?
So you're saying I shouldn't cry to YouTube every time I'm offended?
Yeah, don't cry to YouTube.
Okay.
No, what did you think of the movie?
I think we talked about when we watched the trailer on the channel that I was like, oh, this is just gonna be another one of those stupid biopics. I love this movie, and I will say I have a bias and I mentioned in the review, I definitely have a bias coming to this because I was in high school when Reagan got into office the first time, and during his reelection, I was in high school, and I was firmly a Reagan Republican at that time, even though I couldn't vote. But this movie just brought up every memory I have of Ronald Reagan, especially during the Cold War. To me, this movie is all about the member berries, because I remember living through the Cold War. Chris, you remember living through the Cold War?
Yeah, I remember the debates. I remember Carter.
Yeah,
the Carter Reagan debate. There you go again.
Yeah, I was a teenage. I was barely a teenager during the Carter debates, and I was watching these debates. And at that time, I was just kind of forming my political viewpoint. And living in California, weirdly enough, you were already on board with Reagan at the time. So yeah, I mean, 100%. I loved Ronald Reagan as a president. He's one of my favorites. And I love the movie. And yes, I'm clouded. I'm biased. And what I liked about the movie is it gave a lot of context as to why things were happening. Because all we saw was Reagan on television, Reagan in speeches. And to see his background and why he said things and why he did certain things, why he walked away from Gorbachev over the Star Wars program. The tear down this wall, when you see the context of that speech, it is more chilling than seeing it in real life, because you now know why he's saying it, and why it was so important for him to say those words, and to a couple of years after his presidency to see that wall come down. And it's also funny that so I'm having this giant love fest. And then about two-thirds of the way into the movie, they show clip after clip of people hating Reagan and how vilified he was. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember all that now. I remember that Genesis song that went after Reagan, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. I love that song. But I'll end on this one. One of the relationships in this movie that is the most fascinating is his friendship with Tip O'Neill. You got to understand that Ronald Reagan won the election as a Republican, and in his first term dealt with a Democrat Congress, Democrat Senate, Democrat Congress, and he got a lot done. And this is, to me, the sign of true leadership. It is actually being able to cross the aisle and get things done, and realizing that we agree more on things than we don't. And to be able to legislate and encourage, the opposing party to get aspects of your program done, like a tax cut, it just shows you what true leadership is. And I think that's the theme of this movie is why Ronald Reagan was such a great leader, and why we miss that kind of person today. And I think Ronald Reagan is one of the reasons why we are so divided, because as if you know anything about the 1984 election, he won in a landslide, again with the Democratic Congress. And I think that just kind of spoke to both sides, saying you cannot let your opposing party get wins. And, and that's kind of where it begins and ends for me. I love this movie. And I realize that a lot of my Democrat friends will hate this movie.
They'll hate it like knee jerk, but I lived through this history.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I wasn't like, I couldn't wait till I could turn 18 to vote.
Yeah.
So I was like, but I watched every presidential debate. I paid attention. I should give myself more credit. I paid attention to all this stuff, all the moments with Reagan, and it just him being what they say, the father of our country, when things are bad, to actually come to the American people and give a speech to give calm and context. Do our leaders do this now? Yeah, they do. And they sow division. It made me crave real leadership and love of country and love of a great leader that can bring us together, put our differences aside to come together. And none of this is happening now. And it it just reminded me of, that was, yeah. I mean, I remember also, like, I would listen to a lot of punk rock music that hated Reagan,
Oh, yeah.
but you know, what he did standing up to Russia at the time, he even says in the movie, "I'm going to start a war without firing a shot."
Yeah.
With words, and he has the relationship with the young speechwriter.
Mm-hmm.
That thing, it was so good, and so many scenes in this movie resonate about what's happening now. The protesters on the college campus, that scene
Mm-hmm.
was like, that's a comment on what's happening now. It happened, but wow, is there so much of what was in this movie is a comment on today?
Yeah.
Through the lens of the past was amazing, and so many people don't even know our recent history.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sad. So
yeah. Well, I mean, his whole hatred of communism, and how he was kind of brought up realizing the dangers of communism.
yes,
And the other thing is, you mentioned you didn't like the John Voight segments. I did. And I think
it didn't
because
work for me.
it was a different way to tell the story, and B, it was the admonition. It was the it was the confession that Ronald Reagan got the best of them. That they could have won the Cold War, but it was Ronald Reagan who, he knew how to play the game, and he played it well, and that the John Voight character was supposed to notify the Kremlin of credible threats in the political sphere. And when he mentions Ronald Reagan, the actor, no one took him seriously. And that, to me, that was the whole point of that character and why it exists, is that it snuck up on them, and he wound up being right all along.
Well, I think you could have set it up with that character and bookended, but he's throughout the movie. It adds running time. I don't know that we needed it, but that's the biggest flaw, is that structure.
Mm-hmm.
But the movie is still amazing. Dennis Quaid, amazing.
Yeah.
Oscar, he should get nominated. He will not.
Yep.
Because of current day, he will not get nominated for a deserved Oscar for his performance.
Yeah. The other thing is, he was such a people person. I mean, look,
yes.
he became close friends not only with Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, but with Mikhail Gorbachev himself. And you see it at the end of the movie where Gorbachev was actually at the funeral of Ronald Reagan and laid flowers there for him.
So strong recommendation from both you and I for Reagan. See it. It's a limited release. It's an indie movie, and it's really amazing.
See it soon, because the old people are buying all the tickets. It was the same thing at my theater. It was just
old audience,
old people.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm saying it having lived through it as well, along with them. But yeah, it was old people.
Yeah, and I was the youngest guy at the screening.
Yeah. And,
hilarious.
And also I'm in Orange County. I watched it, literally a half a mile from the Nixon Library. So, we're kind of biased here too.